This is a special Brian Glover bonus episode of the Cult Faction podcast.
Superman.
Hi, welcome to the Cult Faction podcast. On what would have been his 87th birthday, we're going to take a look back at the career of cult legend Brian Glover. Brett, over to you.
Okay, Brian Glover. If you don't remember the name, you'll remember the face. So to start with, Brian was born on the 2nd of April 1934, and he was born in Sheffield. But shortly after he was born, he then moved to Barnsley, where he grew up and spent most of his adult life. He attended a Barnsley Grammar School and then the University of Sheffield, where he supplemented his student grant with appearances as a professional wrestler, initially going under the name Eric Tanberg, where he was apparently Swedish. But because, we have a gimmick in the wrestling world. But he was struggling to make an impact with
Well, I'm not
Eric
surprised.
Tanberg.
Sorry to interrupt, and
No
I don't
worries.
want to be disparaging, but I don't think there's any possibility that he could pass off being Swedish.
You're missing the bigger picture. At that point, he was blonde.
Even so,
That was enough in those days.
I guess so, yeah. Fair enough. Sorry, carry on.
But as you say, Eric Tanberg from Sweden wasn't working really, and his wrestling career wasn't moving up the ladder in the way he hoped.
This might be really insulting, but I just need to just get this out of my system and go, hey up, erdy wordy.
Well, you
Carry
do
on.
that every week.
I'll let our northern listeners decide if that's insulting or not, and we'll give you an email later. Right. So Glover, so he completed his studies as a student. He then proceeded to become a school teacher, where he still supplemented his income by wrestling in the evenings.
I'm getting some synergies between Brian Glover and a podcast member.
Cool. He was a PE teacher, though, wasn't he? Was it? I thought it was a.
No,
Was
we get to that.
Okay.
That was in a popular movie.
No, I generally thought he was. I know he was in that, but for some reason, maybe it's just misremembering, and it's
Well, that's.
converging the two. But
I think it's more. Most of the pictures they use of him from his teacher days are from Kes. So
Fair
it's
enough,
just always
yeah.
going to be. Here he is as a teacher. Look, and he's got his tracksuit top and his whistle on.
yeah,
But as much as you couldn't handle the fact that Brian Glover could portray a Swedish man called Eric Tanberg, there's an even bigger twist in the tale here, because one night, and this was his big break,
one night. Sorry.
one night, whilst appearing on a show, they had a wrestler from France coming over, this big star. They billed it. It was all over the posters, and he was like Paris's champion and all that, and he was called Leon Alice. And he'd come from France, and he was going to be this big star. And they, as I say, they built him up. But unfortunately, Leon Harris didn't actually turn up. And they were like, well, we've built this guy. We need something to do. So they got hold of Brian Glover and said, right, you need to go out there, and you're going to be Leon Harris tonight. So now, from being Swedish, he's now French. And
We've all done it.
And he became Leon Harris, the man from Paris.
Brilliant.
And,
I love that.
And the promoter was like, well, no one knows what Harris looks like, so they're not going to know it's you. So they sent him out as Leon Harris, the man from Paris. And for some reason, that just took off, and his career went from strength to strength. But despite not being French, or I don't think he even spoke a word, but it worked. And you'd start to see him rise up onto the World of Sport TV circuit as well. Also, in 1954, he gets married and he becomes a teacher at the same school that he had attended as a pupil, where he taught English and French from 1954, and carried on actually doing that in one form or another up until 1970, including some other schools in Barnsley as well, including one called the Longcar Central School, where he met a guy called Barry Hines, who was also teaching there. He'll figure into the story again in a minute. In the meantime, his teaching's going well, and Glover is wrestling now as Leon Harris, the man from Paris, on the telly, and he's starting to get a bit of a.
There's no amount of times you can say that and it still not be funny.
But the thing is, it sounds northern as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, this is everything about that is perfect.
Yeah. So as well as being a teacher, he then carried on with his wrestling career. So with over the 10 years as being in Leon Harris, the man from Paris, he's risen to sort of a big-time league. He's on the World of Sports on television now. He's got a cult following. And even though he's still being billed as Leon Harris, the man from Paris, as time went on, I know you love that, as time went on, the French bit sort of got downplayed a bit more for some reason, mainly because he was a brash Yorkshireman who did not sound French at all. And he'd be sort of shouting out, "Ask him, ref, how's about that then?" And all these different sort of things, and jostling with the crowd and that sort of thing. And through the stars of the day, he would have been fighting the likes of Colin Johnson, Pete Roberts, Billy Two Rivers, and he had a really, really famous match that you can find on YouTube. It was from Huddersfield on 25th of July 1970 against Les Kellett. And yeah, it's often clipped. If you ever see any sort of British wrestling clip shows, there's normally bits of that on there. So that's always worth a watch. Yeah, get on your YouTube, you can find that. So then, back in his day job as a school teacher, he was approached to play the part of PE teacher Mr. Sugden in the 1966 blockbuster film Kes, where he got rave reviews for his acting skills. And although he continued to wrestle since that appearance, he was suddenly getting more and more demands for television and film work. So suddenly, you have Leon Harris, the man from Paris, who's wrestling on World of Sports, and you've got Brian Glover, the actor now, who has been in Kes, and it's been a massive hit, and now is in demand for film and TV work. So he's sort of got these dual careers going on at the same time.
So was this one of those sort of classic Ken Loach casting people that aren't actors and that kind of is it that kind of?
Yeah, pretty much. Like, it's almost like, well, you know the job, you know the role, and they, it's what you do normally. And I think, I'm not sure how familiar Ken was with his wrestling background, but I think he probably thought he'd have enough to pull it off with the acting involved in that. And yeah, and Ken Loach just sort of threw him in. Barry Hines wrote the film, who was the guy he was a teacher with before. So kind of all these different parts all came into play. Barry Hines had written this film. Ken Loach, as you say, likes the realism of it. And then he probably said, "Oh, who can be this kind of teacher?" And Barry, I imagine, was like, "I know a guy."
Yeah.
Ken Loach was probably like, "Isn't he French?" And he's going, "No, he's not."
I thought he hailed from Paris.
Yeah. And once those confusions were cleared up, we ended up with Kes. Although, to be fair, he did appear in Smashing Time, the 1967 movie, as well, but that was a sort of an uncredited role where he's basically some sort of gangster he's seen entering a party looking a bit rough and surly, so he stretched himself for that one. So from being in Kes, suddenly all eyes are on him now. The wrestling career is still Saturday afternoons. He's still on TV as Leon Harris, the man from Paris, and wrestling around the weekends around the town. Weekdays he's a school teacher, but this film career is kicking off now. We've got Kes going big time, and
that's the thing, isn't it? I mean, Kes was a really big hit,
massive. Still quoted a lot today. I mean, what's his face? Keith Lemon managed to get about five series of his program out of Kes.
Yeah. And it was actually a top film. I remember watching it as a kid. Several years to be clear, several years after it was first released. And it's one of those. It's like a champ. It kind of gets you, and you can't help but get a little lump in your throat for some of it as well. It's a dark, touching film.
Yeah, definitely. Cause it was one of those sort of realistic drama in a time where sort of Disney was becoming more and more of a bigger thing. You suddenly had this sort of young person drama that was a bit more real life, a bit more down. Well, obviously Ken Loach known for that now. Back then, maybe not as much. And and I think it
he
touched a
wasn't,
lot of
but
people.
I think those type of films been around for a long time. This is a complete different tangent, but
Go for it.
Brighton Rock and Kathy Come Home, all that sort of stuff. What we would now call kind of kitchen sink dramas were around long before the 70s, and Britain was famed for them. But you're right. I mean, this was probably a much bigger hit, a much bigger film than any of those two. That, well, I don't know about Brighton Rock, actually. That might have been a bigger film. Anyway, Britain's famed for those kind of films, especially back in the day.
Yeah, a big deal. It was a big deal. Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably more a mainstream one as well, I think.
Mainstream. That's where I was trying to get to.
Yeah, probably more mainstream because again, the book was probably being done at school and things like that, and the film come out and has been done since. Many schools have made children watch it and read it, and for good reason. It's a good thing. But yeah, so he's made this Kes now. He's got this big hit film on his hands with no acting training at all. That he's walked in, done it. He's got his wrestling career going well, and then suddenly he's getting invites to appear at the Royal Court Theatre in London, in like the changing rooms, and he did a season with the Royal Shakespeare Company. So we've conquered the big screen with Kes. We've treaded the boards at the Royal Shakespeare Company in the National Theatre and earned our stripes there. Saturday afternoons, we are still wrestling as Leon Harris, the Man from Paris. But the other nights of the week now are starting to get a bit of Brian Glover. As from about 1972, we get some appearances on Coronation Street. Things like What Happened to the Lightning Lads, The Regiment, The Protectors, and quite a few of those sort of ITC shows and other things that are around at the time. But again, he wasn't just relying on that. We also got Midsummer Night's Dream, where he played Bottom in the theatre, and also as the prison inmate Cyril Heslop in the classic sitcom Porridge opposite Ronnie Barker. And he had one big line that I can remember from that. If you've got any other memories of Porridge, chuck it in. But I just remember him chatting with Norman Stanley Fletcher, Ronnie Barker. They're talking about books. And he says, I read a book once. Green it was. Okay, yeah, Glover would go on to have a lot more TV roles and a whole lot of stuff. But stuff that Cult Faction would be interested in includes things like The Sweeney, Dixon Doc Green, Jabberwocky, Secret Army. We had the Famous Five. Popped up in Taggart, Return of the Saint, bit of Hazel, Minder.
He was that safe get to or go to actor, wasn't he?
Yeah, definitely. I think he was, for all his sort of, not quite renter villain, but that's like say the surly northern guy. Yeah, he was almost. Yeah, I think you're right. He's almost the He's almost like he was like the Phil Daniels of the North.
Yeah, but even more so. I mean,
definitely.
the amount of roles that
he had a much bigger career.
But he was just that solid, solid performer that people. He was never a huge lead role, but a director or a producer knew that they could bring him in to do a role and he would do the job. I mean,
he's a very good character actor, and sometimes that's used as a kind of like a disservice, but if you look at the role he plays in Porridge, which is a very I don't know what the right term,
a bit thick, the character.
Yeah, there's not a lot going on.
I mean, you guys know me as the sportsman that I am, and I'm looking at like a football team, and he's not a striker, he's more of a left back or a decent midfielder. He's never necessarily going to get the glory, but if you want a solid part of your team, you're getting involved.
Definitely, yeah. I like that.
Did I pull that off like I know what I'm talking about?
Yeah,
nice analogy.
Maybe rugby would have been a better sport to choose.
It probably would have been. Maybe a first row, something like that.
Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, and then in 1978, he co-writes, so we're writing as well now, and stars as a wrestling promoter MC in the TV movie Send in the Girls, which features many known wrestlers at the time like Kendo Nagasaki, Jim Breaks, Brian Maxine, Giant Haystacks, but also features Michael Elphick, Floella Benjamin, and Annie Ross. Now, Send in the Girls is around online on YouTube. It's never going to get shown on TV ever again, but it was a big thing at the time, and it was a big deal. But also, this is about the time now where Glover is putting the wrestling on the back burner now and concentrating more on his actual acting career. And this would pay off big time with probably one of his most memorable and most quoted roles ever when he appears in American Werewolf in London.
I thought you were going to say Press Gang.
Can anyone remember that one?
We all remember the Alamo.
Stick to the path, beware the moon. Yeah, probably the coolest pub scene or bar scene, if you're American, in any film, including Roadhouse.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you on that. I think he owns that pub, if that makes sense. He owns that scene.
And it's such an iconic scene as well, which a lot of people have tried to do a version of, but that was the first time where it was really done well.
And you actually felt the uncomfortableness of the American guys walking in there. A young Rick Mal popping up as well in that scene. But yeah, Glover carries that scene and sort of leads our American friends through it and gives them some sound advice that they didn't listen to.
Still use to this day.
And yeah, you know, how many people can be in a film for like 5 minutes and just steal it from the main cast? Because that was probably the coolest thing in that film until Jenny Agutter turned up. That's for a completely different reason, though. Different categories.
Yeah.
So from there as well, we ended up in things like the first great train robbery, the still very freaky Company of Wolves.
See, that film freaks me out. So let's just move on.
Jabberwocky,
classic.
Leon the Pig Farmer, Alien 3.
Yeah, well, that's a whole. Alien is a whole.
I like that film. It would also appear in the Bollywood hit 1942: A Love Story. So, the man from Paris, who was once a Swede, who was from Yorkshire, had a Bollywood hit.
Awesome. I did not know this.
Did he do any dancing?
I say exactly what I was going to ask. Is there any dancing?
I'll be honest. I've tried to find it, but I've not been able to get hold of it. But I'm imagining he doesn't. Yeah. I'm imagining he might be a brash Yorkshireman who may or may not get fisticuffed.
Yeah. Every now and then, just do very, very quick cut shots to him, and it zooms into his face or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, again, there were lots of on the theatre and on the stage and the play for today's. There was loads of all that going on still. He would also pop up as Lug, and opposite Peter Davison in Campion, the TV series.
Yeah, you're right.
He was the bodyguard. Yeah. He was basically Campion was like this sort of detective, but a bit of a crook as well.
Detective-y type thing, wasn't he? Yeah.
And he played Lug, who was basically the Yorkshire odd job. Campion was that was one of those series I remember enjoying it, but it never ever got repeated. So I don't know if that might turn up on BritBox or something like that, or Forces TV. Come on, Forces TV. That's a shout out to you guys. Other things he appeared in. I played Griffiths in the Doctor Who story Attack of the Cybermen. He was in, again, lots of more theatre stuff and that. And as the 90s rolled in, he was probably most famous for his role as Mr. Rottweiler, the neighbour from hell in Bottom. Anyone got any memories of that?
He's the one they steal his gas line or something. Yeah,
steal his gas, and ends up, I think he smashes the wall through.
Yeah. Yeah, because I remember it ending with sort of, he's got the both of them in a headlock in a classic wrestling style, which I'm sure was a nod to his previous careers. I mean, they should have billed him in the episode as the man from Paris.
Leon Harris, the man.
Leon Harris, the man from Paris. That would have been a much better credit line to have than Brian Glover. That would have been awesome. In fact, I don't think I'm ever going to call him Brian Glover again. He's now Leon Harris, as far as I'm concerned.
Leon Harris.
Leon Harris.
It's just a big capital A. Look, again, then there was loads of voiceover work and guest presenting. He was even turned out a couple of times on like Saturday morning kids TV here and there through the late 70s into the 80s and the 90s, and little spots normally where he'd sort of be a bit of a rough house. 95, he actually returns to the sort of wrestling world in a way when he co-writes and stars as Johnny Pex in the TV series Rumble, which was about wrestling. It also featured Leslie Joseph, Stephen Hartley, and Stephen Marcus. And that was sort of his last sort of big major deal, really, as sadly he developed a brain tumor and then passed away on the 24th of July 1997 at the age of 63. But in that time, he managed to pack a lot into that career from a lot of different worlds. And again, I don't think what we said earlier, I don't think anyone could probably do a career like that again.
No, I don't think so. I'm just trying to think, if if you just look at recent, when I say recent, I mean the last 10, 15 years, Loach films, the people that have been the unknowns, the people off the street, if you like, they've had a moment in the sun, if you forgive the cliche, as in when that film's out, they're on BBC News, they're on this, that, and the other, giving them their story that I just walked in off the street and got the part. You don't see him again, not like he did.
And also, and no disrespect to actors out, because they all have a difficult life, living from one scene to the next and one film to the next. But even
Tom Cruise must really struggle.
No, but new actors, should I say then?
Yeah.
But he was a grafter, as a lot of the people, even actors at the time, the acting was possibly not their primary job. And even in, Brian Glover, he was a teacher, he was a wrestler at the same time. He was doing acting as well.
Yeah, although I guess on the flip side to that, there back then there may have been more opportunity to get involved in these things, because you had the likes of the Play for Today. There was Crown Court, stuff like that. That there were continuous churns of episodes with different cast members in each time. Like Crown Court, it was a different case each week.
Yeah,
so but he had to have a different cast. I'm not, but I'm just saying you don't get shows like that now. You don't.
There's less of them, and even like sort of the Bill and all that kind of good stuff. There were 3 times a week have died off. You basically
have that was a training ground for for young actors. If you look at anyone famous now, if you go back 10, 15 years, they would probably popped up in an episode of The Bill.
Yeah, even nowadays you have soap operas and then series every now and again.
Yeah, but that's not to take anything away from what we just said about Brian Glover. I'm just
no, not at all. No,
it's more of a comment on what gets greenlit now, I guess. What people want to see on telly, which is reality shite.
That's. I think it's all gone, Paul.
No, I was just going to say, he had a long-spanning career, and he had some really pivotal roles. I think there's a bit of me that thinks, kind of just feel maybe there was a missing crescendo. He kind of did all these little things, but at the heyday and at the end of his career, it just would have been lovely if that could have continued and he'd have gone out on a really big high. Yeah,
I'd have liked to have seen him turn up as like the long lost dad of the Mitchell brothers or something like that. Just some sort of
big
that,
Ron's brother.
Yeah, slightly smaller Ron. Or something like that. Yeah, no, but I know what you mean. Just that sort of, because I mean, it does say something for the man that like most TV shows he's in, that happens to be the best episode of that show.
No, absolutely.
Yeah,
it would just be nice to see him have that lead role, and so and it didn't get the opportunity, unfortunately. But it was just one of those. Not wasted talents, absolutely not. But you just kind of think, actually, that guy, when you look back at his career and look back at the roles he's performed, I'd love to have seen him, have his, as I said, centre stage, in something in the latter days.
Maybe a Tarantino.
Well, it would be a Guy Ritchie, wouldn't it?
I think,
Jason Statham's dad.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's got the hair.
That would round everything off perfectly, wouldn't it?
Yeah. And I think that would be something like that. Oh, fantasy films, that would be.
I'm thinking about that now. Yeah, a really deep, gritty role, as opposed to just the normal Statham stuff that we just talked about recently, but yeah. Well, that's one for us to write anyway. Not with not with Brian, but
Leon Harris the movie.
Yeah,
I'd pay money to see that. Okay, so there we go. That was a kind of brief potted history of the legend that is Brian Glover on what would have been his 87th birthday, who for me will forever now be Leon Harris, the man from Paris. Thank you for listening.
Superman.